Hello everyone, and welcome back to another GIS lecture video. And in this lecture video, we're going to talk about the idea of Intersect, which is another one of these basic spatial analysis tools. So up to this point, we've talked about buffer, which creates a new area based on a specified distance. And we've talked about clip, that removes area from one set of features based on the overlap with another. There are additional, more complex spatial analysis operations that we're going to talk about now. And the first is going to be intersect. So intersect actually functions a lot like clip. But the difference with these spatial analysis tools, as opposed to the ones we've talked about so far, is that these not only impact the geometry, so the coordinates, right, the locations, but they also activate the attribute tables. Okay. So intersect functions similar to clip in that it creates a new output with the geometry of the overlapping areas and the attributes from both sets. Right? And if you think about clip, right, with clip we didn't talk about the attributes because we didn't care. Because one feature was there strictly to be a cookie cutter. Right? With buffer we didn't talk about attributes because we were just creating an extension of an existing feature. With intersect, right, we're actually creating a new output that acts much like clip in terms of it's only the areas of overlap, but it's also going to start bringing over attributes. Okay. So let's imagine, for an example of intersect here, that we have two data sets. The first data set is going to be some polygons that represent wetlands. Right. So these green sort of semi-elliptical shapes here, these represent wetlands, right? And they could have, let's say, a wetland type. Let's say this is a fen wetland, this is a coastal wetland, this is a salt marsh, and this is a wooded wetland. Okay? So this, what I've written here, this is an attribute called type, right? So the wetlands have an attribute called type, which is a character string for the type of wetland that it has. Okay? And then what we also have is we have some gray squares here. Okay. And these gray squares, these represent construction sites. Right, so we have wetlands in green with their types, and we have construction sites. And each construction site will have the name of the owner. So this could be Jones. This could also be Jones, Murray, Carl, and Smith. Right, so construction sites have an attribute for owner. Right. And so what we're going to do with Intersect is we're going to look at each time the features overlap. Right, I'm going to do this in orange. Right, so they overlap here. So I'm going to do my best to do this graphically. Right, when we run Intersect, right, what we do is we create a new output with the geometry of overlapping areas. So that's going to be these orange areas that I'm highlighting here. Right, there's overlap here, there's overlap here, there's overlap here, 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 and here. Oh, and here as well. Right, so those areas of overlap, those are what I'm going to get output in Intersect, right? And so I'm going to do my best to try to draw these. Right, so we're going to get something that looks kind of like this. Right, I'm going to number these. So this is 1. Actually, let's number them in a different color after the fact. So we're going to have something kind of over here that looks kind of like that. And on the other side, we're going to have something that looks kind of like that. We're going to have something that looks kind of like this. Down here, we'll have something that looks kind of like that. Over here, right, something that looks kind of like this. And then something that looks kind of like that, right? And so if I number these in a different color, let's say purple, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Right, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right, and you can see that the output result is only those areas where they have overlap between the inputs is given in the output. Right, so we had 2 inputs, wetlands, which were these oblong shapes, and construction, which were these gray rectangular sites. Anywhere that they overlapped, we created a new weird shape, weirdly shaped polygon in the outputs. Right, so this is the outputs. Oops. Right, this is outputs. Right, these are the inputs. Right, so it creates a new output with geometry of the overlapping areas and the attributes from both sets. Okay? So let's talk about what the attributes from both sets means for a second. I'm going to give us just a little bit more room. Okay? So let's talk about the attributes for feature 1. Okay, for feature 1, what attributes is it going to have? Well, it's going to have the attributes from both sets. So it's going to have a type, and it's going to have an owner. Right. So this is the output attribute table. Right, this output attribute table is going to have the same attributes as both of the inputs. So it's going to have a type coming from wetlands, and it's going to have an owner coming from construction sites. Okay, so looking at the first polygon here, we're going to look at where it came from. Well, it came from the polygon, wetland polygon here, which had a type of fen. Right, and then it came from the construction site here, which had an owner of Jones. Right, so this output polygon 1 here is going to have an attribute table with fen from the wetland type and Jones from the construction site. Okay, let's go through a couple more of how these attributes work. Right, 2, right? It's going to have 2 is this one, so it's going to have a type of fen again, right? Because the fen is coming from this piece here. The owner is coming from this piece here, so it's going to be Murray. Okay. So let's look at this. Let's look at 2 more. Let's look at 6. So we're going to jump down the attribute table a little bit, and we're going to look at 6. Okay. All right. So 6. Right. It's going to have its type. Right. Is going to come from this piece here. So its type is going to be salt marsh. Right. And then its owner is going to be Smith. Be consistent with my coloring here. Its owner is going to be Smith. Right. Let's do one more. Let's do 7. Okay. So 7 is going to have a type of wooded. Right, again, coming from this, the wetland piece of the overlap. And then it's going to have an owner of Smith coming from the construction site piece of the overlap. Okay. Now, this is a pretty simple example in terms of each input only having one attribute, but you could have multiple attributes, right? The construction site could have not only an owner, but maybe how much the property cost in the area, right? The fen could have not just the type, but also maybe a biodiversity index and a habitat quality, or maybe a binary for whether or not it contains an invasive species, right? So don't think that we are just strictly restricted to just having one attribute each. These could have their own full attribute tables. Okay? So hopefully this makes sense. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you.